Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Apocalypse, Masonry of the Eve, from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Apocalypse, Masonry of the Eve. The adoption of St. John the Evangelist as one of the patrons of our lodges has given rise among the writers of Freemasonry to a variety of theories as to the original cause of his being, thus connected with the institution. Several traditions have been handed down from remote periods which claim him as a brother, among which the Masonic student will be familiar with that which represents him as having assumed the government of the craft as a Grand Master after the demise of John the Baptist. I confess that I am not willing to place implicit confidence in the correctness of this legend, and I candidly subscribe to the prudence of Delco's remark that it is unwise to assert more than we can prove and to argue against probability. There must have been, however, in some way, a connection more or less direct between the Evangelist and the institution of Freemasonry, or he would not from the earliest times have been so universally claimed as one of its patrons, if it was simply a Christian feeling, a religious veneration, which gave rise to this general homage. I see no reason why St. Matthew, St. Mark, or St. Luke might not as readily and appropriately have been selected as one of the lines parallel. But the fact is that there is something, both in the life and in the writings of St. John the Evangelist, which closely connects him with our mystic institution. He may not have been a Freemason in the sense in which we now use the term, but it will be sufficient if it can be shown that he was familiar with other mystical institutions, which are themselves generally admitted to have been more or less intimately connected with Freemasonry by deriving their existence from a common origin. Such a society was the Essenian Fraternity, a mystical association of speculative philosophers among the Jews, whose organization very closely resembled that of Freemasons, and who are even supposed by some to have derived their tenets and their discipline from the builders of the temple. As Oliver observes, their institution may be termed Freemasonry, retaining the same form but practiced under another name. Now there is little doubt that St. John was an Essene. Calmet positively asserts it, and the writings and life of St. John seem to furnish sufficient internal evidence that he was originally of that brotherhood. But it seems to me that St. John was more particularly selected as a patron of Freemasonry in consequence of the mysterious and emblematic nature of the Apocalypse, which evidently assimilated the mode of teaching adopted by the Evangelist to that practiced by the fraternity. If anyone who has investigated the ceremonies performed in the ancient mysteries, the spurious Freemasonry, as it has been called, of the pagans, will compare them with the mystical machinery used in the book of Revelation, he will find himself irresistibly led to the conclusion that St. John the Evangelist was intimately acquainted with the whole process of initiation into these mystic associations, and that he has selected its imagery for the groundwork of his prophetic book. Mr. Faber, in his Origin of Pagan Idolatry, Volume 2, Book 6, Chapter 6, has, with great ability and clearness, shown that St. John in the Apocalypse applies the ritual of the ancient initiates to a spiritual and prophetic purpose. The whole machinery of the Apocalypse, says Mr. Faber, from beginning to end, seems to me very plainly to have been borrowed from the machinery of the ancient mysteries. And this, if we consider the nature of the subject, was done with the very strictness and attention to poetical decorum. St. John himself is made to personate an aspirant about to be initiated, and accordingly, the images presented to his mind's eye closely resemble the pageants of the mysteries, both in nature and in order of succession. The prophet first beholds a door opened in the magnificent temple of heaven, and into this he is invited to enter by the voice of one who plays the Hierophant. Here he witnesses the unsealing of a sacred book, and forthwith he is applauded by a troop of ghastly apparitions, which flit in horrid succession before his eyes. Among these are preeminently conspicuous a vast serpent, the well-known symbol of the Great Father, and two portentous wild beasts, which severally come up out of the sea and out of the earth. Such hideous figures correspond with the canine phantoms of the orgies, which seem to rise out of the ground, and with the polymorphic images of the hero god, who was universally deemed the offspring of the sea. Passing these terrific monsters in safety, the prophet, constantly attended by his angel Hierophant, who acts the part of an interpreter, is conducted into the presence of a female, who is described as closely resembling the great mother of pagan theology, like Isis emerging from the sea and exhibiting herself to the aspirant, Apuleius. This female deity, unborn upon the marine wild beast, appears to float upon the surface of many waters. She is said to be an open and systematical harlot, just as the Great Mother was the declared female principle of fecundity, and as she was always propitiated by liberal fornication rendered to a religious system, and as the initiated were made to drink a prepared liquid out of a sacred goblet. So this harlot is represented as intoxicating the kings of the earth with the golden cup of her prostitution. On her forehead, the very name of Mystery is inscribed, and the label teaches us that, in point of character, she is the great universal mother of idolatry. The nature of this mystery, the officiating Hierophant undertakes to explain, and an important prophecy is most curiously and artfully veiled under the very language and imagery of the orgies. To the sea-born Great Father was ascribed a threefold state. He lived, he died, and he revived. And these changes of conditions were duly exhibited in the mysteries. To the sea-born wild beast is similarly ascribed a threefold state. He lives, he dies, he revives. While dead, he lies floating on the mighty ocean, just like Horus or Osiris, or Shiva or Vishnu. When he revives again like the kindred deities, he emerges from the waves, and, whether dead or alive, he bears 7 heads and 10 horns, corresponding in number with the 7 art-preserved rishis and the 10 aboriginal patriarchs. Nor is this all, as the worshippers of the Great Father bore his special mark, or stigma, and were distinguished by his name. So the worshippers of the maritime beast equally bear his mark and are equally decorated by his appellation. At length, however, the first or doleful part of these sacred mysteries draws to a close, and the last or joyful part is rapidly approaching, after the prophet has beheld the enemies of God plunged into a dreadful lake, or indignation of liquid fire, which corresponds with the infernal lake, or deluge of the orgies. He is introduced into a splendidly illuminated region, expressly adorned with the characteristics of that paradise, which was the ultimate scope of the ancient aspirants. While without the holy gate of admission are the whole multitude of the profane, dogs and sorcerers, and whoremongers, and murderers, and idolaters, and whosoever loveth and maketh a lie. Such was the imagery of the apocalypse, the close resemblance to the machinery of the mysteries, and the intimate connection between their system and that of Freemasonry, very naturally induced our ancient brethren to claim the patronage of an apostle, so preeminently mystical in his writings, and whose last and crowning work bore so much of the appearance and an outward form of a ritual of initiation. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.